YouTubers are the worst. People see us out there with all this gear and then think that they need to buy all of the things to get out overlanding. I'm here today to tell you that that's not true. Now, I'm not saying that I'm out there with a ton of useless equipment. Everything I have for a reason, and I wouldn't take it if it wasn't worth me having. What I mean is you don't need it to get out there and start overlanding. You actually don't even need a four-wheel drive. In fact, the definition of overlanding, according to Overland Journal, is the self-reliant travel to remote destinations where the journey is the primary goal. Nowhere on there do I see any mention of the type of vehicle that you've got to have. In fact, they go on to say that it's about the exploration rather than the conquering of obstacles. Most of what I do could be done in a high clearance crossover, and actually sometimes it doesn't even require that. A lot of the time I just recommend a decent set of tires. I've actually seen a minivan going over Engineer Pass. Not that I'd recommend that because, well, a low range gearbox is usually good for the mountain passes, helps with the power getting up the hills, and it helps with engine braking going down the hills. You can definitely start out in what you have. The key is to know its limitations and keep the trails appropriate. That means not taking on mountain passes in your minivan. As you gain more experience with it, you'll realize its shortcomings, what you want to do, what you want from it, and then you can upgrade. You then have the choice as to whether you upgrade your current vehicle or trade it in for something new. Usually, if your current vehicle's less than ideal and you're not personally or financially tied to it, it's easier to trade it in for something that's maybe a little more capable in its stock form. For what I do, I'd recommend three things. First of all, you want a low range transfer case for the extra torque and the engine braking. You want a locking center differential, so it's a true four-wheel drive. And you want a solid rear axle, gives you a little bit more articulation for getting over obstacles. Something like a 4Runner is ideal. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the 4Runner is the right choice for you. It really depends on what you want from your vehicle and what your situation is. You know, if you want something that's more suited for rock crawling, then a Jeep Wrangler would be the better choice. If you've got a large family, or if you want to take on maybe tamer trails and want something that's more fuel efficient, those all lead to different vehicles. And it goes back to just getting out there and seeing what works best for you and making your decision from there. All that being said, if you're new to this, I would not recommend jumping in your Miata and heading straight for the Arctic Circle. Start close to home for a long weekend at a campground. And I know that doesn't fit in with the definition of overlanding, it's not self-reliant, but it's still a good way to get started. That means if you forget something, you can easily go home and pick it up, or if you realize you're missing an important piece of gear, you can head out and buy it. On my first trip, I realized I needed some oven gloves, so I went over to Walmart and bought some, and actually still take the same pair with me today. They're a little old and it looks as though they need a wash. It's a good idea to make a list and take that list with you, so as you realize there are things you're missing and things you need, that you can add it to the list for next time. Some basics, things like a flashlight, some water, food, a way to cook that food, a sleeping bag, maybe a mattress, and a tent. And believe it or not, the tent does not need to be a rooftop tent. The first few trips I went on, I went in a second-hand Walmart tent that cost me $10 from Facebook Marketplace, had an $8 inflatable mattress, and I just took some bedding from home. These days I do use a rooftop tent, and I actually really like having the rooftop tent. For the longer trips, it makes my life a lot easier. I think it's worth having, but definitely not a necessity and not for everyone. Once you're happy with your camping setup, you can start going out on the trails and maybe even camping on the trails. And once again, you don't necessarily have to be self-reliant when you start out. Go with someone else. It's even better if you go with someone else who knows what they're doing. If you want to meet new people to go out into the trails with, Facebook groups are a great place to start. You can post there and see if you can join another person's trip or have another person join you on your trip. And another option is the Overland Expos. And actually, if you camp at the Overland Expos, it's a great way to get integrated, meet a whole bunch of people. And you can also go to the classes where you can learn some of the overlanding basics, off-road driving basics, recovery, map reading, that kind of thing. The expos are also a great way to accidentally spend a lot of money, so be careful. When you do head out onto the trails, it is a good idea to bring some basic recovery equipment, something like a tow strap, and it doesn't have to be stupid expensive. I just recommend a tow strap without the hooks already built in on the end, and get a couple of shackles to go with it. When it comes to other equipment, I've seen far too many people that spend all of their money on the latest and best high-end gadgets, and then have no money left over for gas. $800 light bars are fantastic, but there's no reason to buy them if you then can't afford to go out and use them. And there are some things that you definitely do want to spend the money on, so you get the best, you get something that's got the quality, it's going to last, and there are other things that you don't necessarily need to spend the money just for the name. Just be aware that generally speaking, the cheaper something is, the worse it is. There's less chance of it working properly and more chance that it'll break. If you've got deep pockets, it's not a problem. Just buy the best of everything. But for everyone else, the way I see it is if it's something you're going to rely 100% on, or if it's something that'd be dangerous if it were to break, then spend the extra money. And that definitely means spending the extra time and money on your vehicle to make sure it's in good working order. Check any loose parts, check the fluids, check the bushings, that kind of thing. Make sure it's not going to leave you stranded, because that is one of the few things that you will 100% rely on. For other equipment, it's worth adding that sometimes you're better off buying multiples rather than blowing your entire budget on one high quality thing. That's especially true for recovery equipment. Let's say you have a $500 budget for your recovery equipment. It is actually possible to blow that entire $500 on one set of traction boards. Or you could buy yourself a $60 set of traction boards, a couple of tow straps, some shackles, $350 winch, good, decent quality winch, and a hitch mount for your winch. And out of those two options, I picked the latter. I had a $60 set of traction boards for about 5 years, and it gave me the extra money to spend on diversifying my recovery equipment so that I wasn't relying on just one thing. A few other pieces of emergency equipment that are worth taking with you are a good, well-equipped first aid kit, a fire extinguisher, and a toolkit that's going to work on your vehicle. And then as you go further, you may end up adding more things. For example, when I started going out on solo trips, I added a satellite messenger to my kit so I can get a hold of people from anywhere I need to in the event of an emergency. Finally, there's the question of how to find routes and places to go. Occasionally, I do come up with my own based on what I find on maps or between places I've seen on YouTube or social media, but a lot of the time I'll actually use someone else's published route. On my website, I've got a long list of routes that have been created for various states across the US, so I'll put a link to that in the description so you can go check that out. For some reason, whenever I recommend one of those to people, even if it's one that goes through their state, they'll say that they don't have time to do it. They can't do the Continental Divide Trail, for example, because they don't have 3 weeks. But you don't have to do the whole thing. You can do little chunks of it. Let's say you've only got a week. You could just do the part that goes through your state and the next state. If you've only got a weekend, just go to where it is closest to you, pick it up for a couple of days, then go home. You can do as much or as little of it as you want. And I'm pretty sure that I haven't completed any of them either. I know I've done all of the Kentucky Adventure Tour, but I've done it little chunks at a time, like a weekend at a time. Usually what I do is I will actually mix and match. I'll do a little bit of one and I'll head over to another one. And then along the way, I'll go off and see some sights. One of the things I've actually started using is the Onyx Map app. It has thousands of routes all across the US, and when you push on them, it tells you about them, it gives them a difficulty rating, you got pictures on there. So when I'm out and about, I'll open that up and see if there's anything cool around to go check out. Another app that I use a lot is Gaia GPS. I actually have a discount for that in the description, so you can get a little bit of money off that one. Gaia doesn't really have published routes, it's more of just a mapping app. But anytime I download someone else's route, I'll add it to Gaia. Anytime I see something on Onyx that looks cool, I'll add it to Gaia. And when I'm out actually traveling, I'll track where I go. If I see a cool looking campsite, but it's not time to camp, I'll add it to Gaia as well. And what it means is basically it's a huge library of places to go. And next time I'm out there, I can see, if I want to go camp, I can head over to that campsite I had saved. And it's actually gotten to the stage that if I go to Utah or Colorado, I don't really need to plan a route because I've got so many things saved on there. I can just head out and kind of make it up as I go. Another recommendation I have is to take a paper atlas. I personally like the benchmark atlases. They're great because it's a backup to using your cell phone or using the app, but also it makes rerouting a lot easier. If you've got a road closed, for example, in Idaho, they're constantly closing roads because of forestry. I can look at the atlas and I can quite easily plan out an alternative route. And as we come to the end of the video, I want to be clear that I'm not saying you shouldn't buy the equipment that I use. Everything I take with me has a purpose. It makes my trips more comfortable and it makes them easier. I'm just saying you don't necessarily need it to get started. Just start simple, don't prioritize gear over taking trips, and don't wait until your vehicle's finished. If you do, you'll never leave. Thanks for watching.